Greetings, one and all, once again, back to Exploring Arda, a Tolkien-centered podcast where I am your host, Jackson, and I go through a bunch of Tolkien's works other than Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And, once again, we are continuing on with Children of Húrin, so I'm glad to be back again, along with one of the, somewhat familiar, smaller characters of Túrin's story. This one will be going into chapter 7 of Mim the Dwarf. I'm going to say Mim because if I say meme, it just kind of sounds funny, of Meme the Dwarf. So I'm going to say Mim. Of course, that's like the eye has that little, I forgot the word right now, but it's like the little up arrow kind of symbol above the eye. So I'm going to say Mim. From the last time, obviously, Túrin is pretty much like the head of his like outlaw gang, and Beleg Strongbow ultimately did find Túrin, and he's pretty much trying to convince Túrin that hey, he's been pardoned of the whole death of Saros, but Túrin's like, nah, I'm gonna lead these guys on, hopefully to a better life, just better in nature, I suppose, but that's kind of like his goal right now. So, I don't know. And then Beleg leaves right before he tells Túrin where he's going to be at, but Túrin kind of does the same thing back to him, and then he just leaves. So, and that's kind of like where we're at right now in the chapter here. So, I think with all that being said, we're just going to go right into this story. So, chapter 7 of Mim the Dwarf. Now the tale turns to Mim the Petty-dwarf. The Petty-dwarfs are long out of mind, for Mim was the last. Little was known of them even in days of old. The Nibin Nogrim, the elves of Beleriand, called them long ago, but they did not love them, and the Petty-dwarfs loved none but themselves. If they hated and feared the orcs, they hated also the Eldar and the exiles most of all, for the Noldor, they said, had stolen their lands and their homes. Nargothrond was first found and its delving begun by the Petty-dwarfs, long before Finrod Felagund came over the sea. They came, some said, of dwarves that had been banished from the dwarf cities of the east in ancient days. Long before the return of Morgoth, they had wandered westward. Being masterless and few in number, they found it hard to come by the ore of metals, and their smithcraft and store of weapons dwindled, and they took to lives of stealth and somewhat smaller in nature than their eastern kin, walking with bent shoulders and quick, furtive steps. Nonetheless, as all the dwarf kind, they were far stronger than their stature promised, and they could cling to life to a great hardship. But now at last they had dwindled and died out of Middle Earth, all save Mim and his 2 sons, and Mim was old even in the reckoning of dwarves, old and forgotten. After the departure of Beleg, and that was in the second summer after the flight of Túrin from Doriath, things went ill for the outlaws. There were rains out of season, and orcs in greater numbers than before came down from the north and along the old south road over Teaglin, troubling all the woods on the west borders of Doriath. There was little safety or rest, and the company were more often hunted than hunters. There you go. One night, as they lay lurking in the fireless dark, Túrin looked on his life, and it seemed to him that it might well be bettered. I must find some secure refuge, he thought, and make provision against winter and hunger, but he did not know whither to turn. Next day he led his men away southward, further than they had yet come from the Teaglin and the marches of Doriath, and after 3 days' journeying they halted at the western edge of the woods at Sirian's Vale. There the land was drier and barer, as it began to climb up the moorlands. Soon after, it glanced that as the grey light of the day of rain was failing, Túrin and his men were sheltering in a holy thicket, and beyond it was a treeless space, in which there were great stones, leaning or tumbled together. All was still, save for the drip of rain from the leaves. Suddenly a watchman gave a call, and leaping up, they saw 3 hooded shapes, grey-clad, going stealthily among the stones. They were burdened each with a great sack, but they went swiftly for all that. Túrin cried them to halt, and the men ran out on them like hounds, but they held on their way, and though Androg shot at them, 2 vanished in the dusk. One lagged behind, being slower or more heavily burdened, and he was soon seized and thrown down, and held by many hard hands, though he struggled and bit like a beast. But Túrin came up and rebuked his men. "What have you there?" he said. would need to be so fierce? It is old and small. What harm is in it? It bites, said Androg, nursing his bleeding hand. It is an orc, or of orc kin. Kill it. It deserves no less for cheating our hope, said another who had taken the sack. There is nothing here but roots and small stones. Nay, said Túrin, it is bearded. It is only a dwarf, I guess. Let him up and speak. Alright, so we are going to do a little quick break here. And the funny thing is, funny thing at the end of the whole segment here, they're all thinking that this is some creature or an orc, and it's just, Túrin's just like, it's only a dwarf. Like, it's just like a passing thing. I don't know. I think sometimes the dwarves are treated a little unfairly in a lot of Tolkien's stories. I just feel like they're kind of like tossed off into the side, and they're like, oh, they're a weird creature of like kind of offshooted Middle Earth theories. I don't know. It's just weird how dwarves are treated in all of his stories. But yeah, pretty much we just go into a quick backstory of how the Petty-dwarves are pretty much like a leaderless small group band of dwarves that really don't really serve a purpose. They don't serve a leader, so to speak, and so that's why there's not very many left. Obviously only Mim and his two sons, and they're pretty much the unfriendly dwarves, I guess. They only care about themselves and whatnot, but they still do the same things, I guess, that a dwarf does, like mining for ores and burrowing inside the earth, things like that. But then, yeah, Túrin and his men pretty much end up approaching, well, obviously Mim and his two sons here, but yeah, just off of a chance, and they were trying to like shoot him down and everything too. So I don't know, crazy. I just thought it was funny how it was just like, it's just a dwarf, guys. It's fine. So back to the story. So it was that Mim came to the tale of the children of Húrin, for he stumbled up on his knees before Túrin's feet and begged for his life. I am old, he said, and poor. Only a dwarf, as you say, not an orc. Mim is my name. Do not let them slay me, master, for no cause, as orcs would. Then Túrin pitied him in his heart, but he said, Poor you seem, Mim, though that would be strange in a dwarf. But we are poorer, I think, houseless and friendless men. If I said that we do not spare for pity's sake only, being in great need, what would you offer for ransom? I do not know what you desire, lord, said Mim warily. At this time, little enough, said Túrin, looking about him bitterly with rain in his eyes. A safe place to sleep in out of the damp woods. Doubtless you have such for yourself. I have, said Mim, but I cannot give it in ransom. I am too old to live under the sky. You need grow no older, said Androg, stepping up with a knife in his unharmed hand. I can spare you that. Lord, cried Mim in great fear, clinging to Túrin's knees, if I lose my life, you lose the dwelling, for you will not find it without Mim. I cannot give it, but I will share it. There is more room in it than once there was. So many have gone forever, he began to weep. Your life is spared, Mim, said Túrin. Till we come to his lair, at least, said Androg. But Túrin turned upon him and said, If Mim brings us to his home without trickery, and it is good, then his life is ransomed, and he shall not be slain by any man who follows me, so I swear. Then Mim kissed Túrin's knees and said, Mim will be your friend, lord. At first he thought you were an elf by your speech and your voice, but if you are a man, then it is better. Mim does not love elves. Where is this house of yours? Said Androg. It must be good indeed to share it with a dwarf. For Androg does not like dwarves. His people brought few good tales of that race out of the east. They left worse tales of themselves behind, said Mim. Judge my home when you see it, but you will need light on your way, you stumbling men. I will return in good time and lead you. Then he rose and picked up his sack. No, no, said Androg, you will not allow this, surely, Captain. You would never see the old rascal again. It is growing dark, said Túrin. Let him leave us some pledge. Shall we keep your sack and its load, Mim? But at this, the dwarf fell on his knees again in great trouble. If Mim did not mean to return, he would not return for an old sack of roots, he said. I will come back. Let me go. I will not, said Túrin. If you will not part with your sack, then you must stay with it. A night under the leaves will make you pity us in your turn, maybe. But he marked, and others also, that Mim set more store by the sack and his load than it seemed worth to the eye. They led the old dwarf away to their dismal camp, and as he went he muttered in a strange tongue that seemed harsh with ancient hatred. But when they put bonds on his legs, he went suddenly quiet. and those who were on the watch saw him sitting on through the silent night, and still as a stone, save for his sleepless eyes that glinted as they roved in the dark. Before morning, the rain ceased, and a wind stirred in the trees. Dawn came more brightly than for many days, and light airs from the south opened the sky, pale and clear about the rising of the sun. Mim sat on without moving, and he seemed as if dead, for now the heavy lids of his eyes were closed, and the morning light showed him withered and shrunken with age. Túrin stood and looked down on him. "There is light enough now," he said. Then Mim opened his eyes and pointed to his bonds, and when he was released he spoke fiercely. "Learn this, fools," he said. "Do not put bonds on a dwarf. He will not forgive it. I do not wish to die, but for what you have done my heart is hot. I repent my promise." "But I do not," said Túrin. "You will lead me to your home. Till then we will not speak of death. That is my will." He looked steadfastly in the eyes of the dwarf, and Mim could not endure it. Few, indeed, could challenge the eyes of Túrin in set will or in wrath. Soon he turned away his head and rose. "Follow me, lord," he said. "Good," said Túrin. "But now I will add this. I understand your pride. You may die, but you shall not be set in bonds again." "I will not," said Mim, "but come now." And with that he led them to the place where he had been captured, and he pointed westward. "There is my home," he said. "You have often seen it, I guess, for it is tall. Sharbund, we called it, before the elves changed all the names." Then they saw that he was pointing to Amon-Rud, the bald hill, whose bare head watched over many leagues of the wild. "We have seen it, but never nearer," said Androg, "for what safe lair can be there, or water, or any other thing that we need? I guess that there was some trick. Do men hide on a hilltop?" "Long sight may be safer than lurking," said Túrin. "Amon-Rud gazes far and wide. Well, Mim, I will come and see what you have to show. How long will it take us stumbling men to come thither?" "All this day until dusk, if we start now," answered Mim. Alright, another quick break here for you guys. Pretty much, Mim is treated very bad. They pretty much put him in bonds, which apparently dwarves really hate. As in the morning, as it comes, he's just like, okay, well, I'm not going to forget this. And he pretty much resents his promise, he repents his promise, that's what it said. Pretty much he's just like, maybe he shouldn't have done the whole deal with Túrin, but like now, with the whole thing of Túrin's gaze always like, kind of like weakening somebody's will in the moment, I suppose. I don't know how that exactly works for Túrin, since he is considered, like man, but like raised by elves, things like that. So that's what I'm saying. Like a lot of like skills of Túrin are like unique in his advantage, but like just the way that things go around him are always bad. So, but yeah, pretty much they discover that Amon-Rud is pretty much the secret hiding place of these petty dwarves, and now they're pretty much off to go to the hill and get some shelter for the time being, and that's kind of where we're at. All right, and the story goes on. Soon the company set out westward, and Túrin went at the head with Mim at his side. They walked warily when they left the woods, but all the land seemed empty and quiet. They passed over the tumbling stones and began to climb, for Amon-Rud stood upon the eastern edge of the high moorlands that rose between the vales of Húrin and Narog, and even above the stony heath at its base its crown was reared up 1,000 feet and more. Upon the eastern side a broken land climbed slowly up to the high ridges among knots of birch and rowan, and ancient thorn trees rooted in rock. Beyond upon the moors and above the lower slopes of Amon-Rud there grew thickets of aglos, but its steep gray head was bare, save for the red saragon that mantled the stone. As the afternoon was waning, the outlaws drew near to the roots of the hill. They came now from the north, for so Mim had led them, and the light of the westering sun fell upon the crown of Amon-Rud, and the saragon was all in flower. "See, there is blood on the hilltop," said Androg. "Not yet," said Túrin. The sun was sinking, and light was failing in the hollows. The hill now loomed up before them and above them, and they wondered what need there could be of a guide to so plain a mark. But as Mim led them on, and they began to climb the last steep slopes, they perceived that he was following some path by secret signs or old custom. Now his course wound to and fro, and if they looked aside they saw that at either hand dark dells and chines opened, or the land ran down into wastes of great stones with falls and holes, masked with bramble and thorn. There, without a guide, they might have been labored and clambered for days to find a way. And actually, before I kind of flip over to the next page, there's another painting here by Alan Lee. I don't know if you guys can really see it well. It depicts Amun Rud here. Obviously, you can't see it too much because there's a lot of glare on the light. Yeah, but it's pretty cool to really see images. I guess all the rocky cliffs of Amun Rud and whatnot. Pretty cool. If you guys ever want to search up the paintings, just kind of search up Alan Lee, Alan Lee Children of Húrin paintings, and you can kind of go through it. Back to it here. At length they came to steeper but smoother ground. They passed under the shadows of ancient rowan trees, into aisles of long-legged aglos, a gloom filled with a sweet scent. Then suddenly there was a rock wall before them, flat-faced and sheer, 40 feet high maybe, but dusk dimmed the sky above them, and guess was uncertain. "Is this the door of your house?" said Túrin. "Dwarves love stone," it said. He drew close to Mim, lest he should play some trick at the last. "Not the door of the house, but the gate of the garth," said Mim. Then he turned to the right along the cliff foot, and after 20 paces he halted suddenly. And Túrin saw that by the work of hands or of weather there was a cleft so shaped that 2 faces of the wall overlapped, and an opening ran back to the left between them. Its entrance was shrouded by long trailing plants rooted in crevices above, but within there was a steep stony path going upward in the dark. Water trickled down it, and it was dank. One by one they filed up. At the top of the path turned right and south again, and brought them through a thicket of thorns out upon a green flat, through which it ran into the shadows. They had come to Mim's house, Bar in Nibin Noeg, which only ancient tales in Doriath and Nargothrond remembered, and no men had seen. But night was falling, and the east was starlit, and they could not yet see how the strange was shaped. This place was shaped. There you go. Amun Rud had a crown, a great mass like a steep cap of stone with a bare flattened top. Upon its north side there stood out from it a shelf, level and almost square, which could not be seen from below, for behind it stood the hill crown like a wall, and west and east from its brink sheer cliffs fell. Only from the north as they had come could it be breached with ease by those who knew the way. From the gate a path led, and passed soon into a little grove of dwarfed birches, there you go, wow, growing about a clear pool in a rock-hewn basin. This was fed by a spring at the foot of the wall behind, and through a runnel it spilled like a white thread over the western brink of the shelf. Behind the screen of the trees, near the spring, between 2 buttresses of rock, there was a cave. No more than a shallow grot it looked, with a low broken arch, but further in it had deepened and bored far under the hill by the slow hands of the Petty-dwarfs, the long years that they had dwelt there, untroubled by the grey elves of the woods. Another quick break, I guess. Just to say that here's Tolkien again with this very, very precise explanations of Amun Rud and how they pretty much find kind of the gateway through very, very narrow passageways through pretty much a thicket of bramble and thorn. Well, kind of thorns. That was kind of the off on the side there, but kind of a secret passage within the roots and plants of Amun Rud itself, which is pretty cool. And I could definitely see that being a thing, especially upon a big hill like that. And it's kind of weaving to and fro here and there, and then it's then there's a cave right there, and that's where they are. So, I mean, it makes sense for dwarves to really be extra defensive about their homes, and so, of course, likewise, they're going to build confusing tunnels until they get to their actual home. So, I thought it was pretty cool, but off we go again. Through the deep dusk, Mim led them past the pool, where now the faint stars were mirrored among the shadows of the birch boughs. At the mouth of the cave, he turned and bowed to Túrin. "Enter, lord," he said. "Bar in Danwith, the house of ransom, for it shall be called." "That may be," said Túrin. "I will look at it first." Then he went in with Mim and the others, seeing him unafraid, followed behind, even Androg, who most misdoubted the dwarf. They were soon in a black dark, but Mim clapped his hands, and a little light appeared, coming round a corner. From a passage at the back of the outer grot there stepped another dwarf, bearing a small torch. "Ah, I missed him, as I feared," said Androg, but Mim spoke quickly, with the other in their own harsh tongue. and seeming troubled or angered by what he heard, he darted into the passage and disappeared. Now Andrag was all going forward. "Attack first," he cried. "There may be a hive of them, but they are small." "3 only, I guess," said Túrin, and he led the way, while behind him the outlaws groped along the passage by the feel of the rough walls. Many times it bent this way and at that, at sharp angles. But at last a faint light gleamed ahead, and they came into a small but lofty hall, dim lit by lamps hanging down out of the roof shadow upon fine chains. Mim was not there, but his voice could be heard, and led by it, Túrin came to the hall, to the door of a chamber opening at the back of the hall. Looking in, he saw Mim kneeling on the floor. Beside him stood silent with the dwarf with a torch, but on a stone couch by the far wall lay another. "Kim! Kim!" the old dwarf wailed, tearing at his beard. "Not all your shots went wild," said Túrin to Andrag, "but this may prove an ill hit. You'll lose shaft too lightly, but you may not live long enough to learn wisdom." Leaving the others, Túrin entered softly and stood behind Mim and spoke to him. "What is the trouble, master? I have some healing arts. May I help you?" Mim turned his head, and his eyes had a red light. "Not unless you can turn back time and cut off the cruel hands of your men," he answered. "This is my son. An arrow was in his breast. Now he is beyond speech. He died at sunset. Your bonds held me from healing him." Again pity long hardened welled in Túrin's heart as water from rock. "Alas," he said, "I would recall that shaft, if I could. Now Barton down with House of Ransom shall this be called in truth. For whether we dwell here or no, I will hold myself in your debt, and if I ever come to any wealth, I will pay you a downwith of heavy gold for your son, in token of sorrow, even if it gladdens your heart no more." Then Mim rose and looked long at Túrin. "I hear you," he said. "You speak like a dwarf lord of old, and that I marvel. Now my heart is cooled, though is not glad. My own ransom I will pay, therefore you may dwell here, if you will. But this I will add. He that loosed the shaft shall break his bow and his arrows, and lay them at my son's feet, and he shall never take an arrow no bear a bow again. If he does, he shall die by it. That curse I lay on him." Andrag was afraid when he heard of this curse, and though he did so with great grudge, he broke his bow and his arrows, and laid them at the dead dwarf's feet. But as he came out of the chamber, he glanced evilly at Mim, and muttered, "The curse of a dwarf never dies, they say, but a man's too may come home. May he die with a dart in his throat." All right, another quick break here. Very bitter break. So, pretty much one of the sons of Mim does end up passing away, and he says, Mim says that it's because that they held him captive over the night, and what I'm assuming is that the roots, I guess, that he was trying to gather was for like the healing process of his son. Which does come across some of Tolkien's stories where certain plants and flowers have this healing aura about them, pretty much. So it is a sad moment here, and where the Andrag has to break his bow and arrow because of slaying, like letting loose arrows in a pitch black cave where it's supposed to be a place of shelter, but he's just too quick to anger, I guess. And he does do that, but he's just like, oh man, I hope Mim dies with literally like an arrow to the throat, which is terrible. So a lot of tension among the groups, basically. Well, among him and Mim, I guess. So, but Túrin's trying to like get in between them and trying to be like the peacemaker, I guess, of the whole group. But yeah, and I think on we go again with the story. Here we go. That night they lay in the hall and slept uneasily for the wailing of Mim and of Ibn, his other son. When that ceased, they could not tell, but when they woke at last, the dwarves were gone and the chamber was closed by stone. The day was fair again, and in the morning sunshine, the outlaws washed in the pool and prepared such food as they had, and as they ate, Mim stood before them. He bowed to Túrin. "He is gone, and all is done," he said. "He lies with his fathers. Now we turn to such life as is left, though the days before us may be short. Does Mim's home please you? Is the ransom paid and accepted?" "It is," said Túrin. "Then all is yours to order your dwelling here as you will, save this. The chamber that is closed, none shall open it but me." We hear you, said Túrin, but as for our life here, we are secure, or so it seems. But still we must have food and other things. How shall we go out? Or still more, how shall we return? To their disquiet, Mim laughed in his throat. Do you fear that you have followed a spider to the heart of his web? He said. Nay, Mim does not eat men, and a spider could ill deal with 30 wasps at a time. See, you are armed, and I stand here bare. No, we must share, you and I, house, food, and fire, and maybe other winnings. The house, I guess, you will guard and keep secret for your own good, even when you know the ways in and out. You will learn them in time, but in the meantime, Mim must guide you, or Ibn, his son, when you go out. And one will go where you go, and return when you return, or await you at some point that you know and can find unguided. Even nearer and nearer home will that be, I guess. To this Túrin agreed, and he thanked Mim, and most of his men were glad. For under the sun of morning, while summer was yet high, it seemed a fair place to dwell in. Androg alone was ill content. The sooner we are masters of our own goings and comings, the better, he said. Never before have we taken a prisoner with a grievance to and fro on our adventures. That day they rested, and cleaned their arms and mended their gear, for they had food to last a day or two yet, and Mim added to what they had. 3 great cooking pots he lent to them and firing, and he brought out a sack. Rubbish, he said, not worth the stealing, only wild roots. But then when they were washed, the roots proved white and fleshy with their skins. And when they boiled, they were good to eat, somewhat like bread, and the outlaws were glad of them, for they had long lacked bread save when they could steal it. Wild elves know them not, grey elves have not found them. The proud ones from over the seas are too proud to delve, said Mim. What is their name? Said Túrin. Mim looked at him sidelong. They have no name, save in the dwarf tongue which we do not teach. And we do not teach men to find them, for men are greedy and thriftless, and would not spare till all the plants had perished. Whereas now they pass them by as they go blundering in the wild. No more will you learn of me, but you may have enough by my bounty, as long as you speak fair and do not spy or steal. Then again he laughed in his throat. They are of great worth, he said, more than gold in the hungry winter, for they may be hoarded like the nuts of a squirrel, and already we are building our store from the first that are ripe. But you are fools if you think that I would not be parted from one small load, even for the saving of my life. I hear you, said Olred, who looked in the sack when Mim was taken. Yet you would not be parted, and your words only make me wonder the more. Mim turned and looked at him darkly. You are one of the fools that spring would not mourn if you perished in winter, he said to him. I had spoken my word, and so must have returned, willing or not, with sack or without. Let a lawless and faithless man think that he will. But I love not to be parted from my own by force of the wicked, be it no more than a shoe thong. Though do I not remember that your hands were among those that put bonds on me, and so help me that I did not speak again with my son. Ever when I deal out the earth bread from my store, you will be counted out, and if you eat it, you shall eat by the bounty of your fellows, and not of me. Then Mim went away, but Olred, who quailed under his anger, spoke to his back. High words! None the less the old rogue had other things in his sack, of like shape but harder and heavier. Maybe there are other things beside earth bread in the wild which elves had not found, and men must not know. That may be, said Túrin. None the less, the dwarf spoke the truth in one point at least, calling you a fool. Why must you speak your thoughts? Silence, if fair words stick to your throat, would serve all our ends better. The day passed in peace, and none of the outlaws desired to go abroad. Túrin paced much upon the green sward of the sword. It says like S-W-A-R-D, sword. Well, sword of the shelf from brink to brink, and he looked out east and west and north, and wondered to find how far were the views in the clear air. Northward, and seeming strangely near, he could descry the forest of Brethil, climbing green about the Ammon Obel. Thither he found that his eyes would stray more often than he wished, though he would not know why, for his heart was set rather to the northwest, where league upon league away on the skirts of the sky it seemed to him that he could glimpse the mountains of shadow and the borders of his home. But at evening Túrin looked west into the sunset, as the sun rode down red into the hazes above the far distant coasts, and the vale of Nardog lay deep in the shadows between. So began the abiding of Túrin, son of Húrin, in the halls of Mim, and Bar Ed Danwith, the house of ransom. And I'll do a little quick break here, and I'll probably read a few more pages of this chapter just to kind of end it. So yeah, more tensions kind of built now between Mim and Ulrad. There you go, because Ulrad is the one, or one of the guys that pretty much put the bonds on Mim, and so they, even though the other outlaws try to talk to Mim, I guess he's angered at the rest of them. He sees that Túrin is the leader, and when Túrin actually ends up rebuking them, I guess Mim has a little more respect for Túrin, and that's why he kind of talks with him. I mean, also because he is the leader, but I feel like Mim has more respect towards Túrin because he actually sees the flaws and the mistakes of the outlaws, which is, that's kind of like what a good leader would do, is, you encourage them, yes, but also see the flaws in the rest of his men and try to make it better. So it's interesting that that's kind of like his reoccurring trait, I guess, when he's like this leader of the outlaws. But yeah, pretty much Mim is pretty much just he doesn't like it. He doesn't like the visitors. He pretty much is like, okay, well, if you're gonna go out, one of us has to go with you. If you can't learn the trails, it's in a way reminds me of Gondolin in a way where they're trying to keep the secret path just that, a secret, hidden in things like that. And yeah, Mim doesn't really teach a whole lot of the dwarven ways because they're not dwarves, things like that, and the tension just builds and builds. Well, not the tension, more of just like the bitterness between everybody just kind of grows. So but yeah, I will read the next few pages before the chapter ends, and that'll be that. So on we go once again. For a long while, the life of the outlaws went well to their liking. Food was not scarce, and they had good shelter, warm and dry, with room enough and to spare, for they found that the caves could have housed 100 or more at need. There was another small hall further in. It had a hearth at one side, above which a smoke shaft ran up through the rock to a vent cunningly hidden in a crevice on the hillside. There was also many other chambers, opening out of the halls or the passage between them, some for dwelling, some for works, or for stores. In storage, Mim had more arts than they, and he had many vessels and chests of stone and wood that looked to be of great age. But most of the chambers were now empty. In the armories hung axes and other gear rusted and dusty. Shelves and ambries were bare, and the smithies were idle, save one, a small room that led out of the inner hall and had a hearth, which shared the smoke vent of the hearth in the hall. There Mim would work at times, but would not allow others to be with him, and he did not tell of secret hidden stair that led from his house to the flat summit of Amon Root. This Androg came upon when seeking in hunger to find Mim's stores of food. He became lost in the caves, but he kept his discovery to himself. During the rest of that year, they went on no more raids, and if they stirred abroad for hunting or gathering of food, they went for the most part in small parties. But for a long while they found it hard to retrace their road, and beside Túrin not more than 6 of his men became ever sure of the way. Nonetheless, seeing that those skilled in such things could come to their lair without Mim's help, they set a watch by day and night, near to the cleft in the north wall. From the south they expected no enemies, nor was there fear of any climbing Amon Root from that quarter. But by day there were at most times a watchman set at the top of the crown, who could look all about. There you go. Steep as were the sides of the crown, the summit could be reached, for to the east of the cave mouth rough steps had been hewn leading up to the slopes where men could clamber unaided. So the year wore on without hurt or alarm, but as the days drew in, and the pool became gray and cold, and the birches bare, and great rains returned, they had to pass more time in shelter. Then they soon grew weary of the dark under hill, or the dim half-light of the halls, and to most it seemed that life would be better if it were not shared with Mim. Too often he would appear out of some shadowy corner or doorway when they thought him elsewhere, and when Mim was near, unease fell on their talk. They took to speaking ever to one another in whispers. Yet, and strange it seemed to them, with Túrin it went otherwise, and he became ever more friendly with the old dwarf, and listened more and more to his counsels. In the winter that followed he would sit for long hours with Mim, listening to his lore and the tales of his life, nor did Túrin rebuke him if he spoke ill of the Eldar. Mim seemed well pleased, and showed much favor to Túrin in return. Him only would he admit to his smithy at times, and there they would talk softly together. But when autumn was past, the winter pressed them hard. Before Yule snow came down from the north heavier than they had known it in the river vales. At that time, and ever the more as the power of Angband grew, the winters worsened in Beleriand. Amonrud was covered deep, and only the hardiest dared stir abroad. Some fell sick, and all were pinched with hunger. In the dim dusk of a day in midwinter there appeared suddenly among them a man, as it seemed, of great bulk and girth, cloaked and hooded in white. He had eluded their watchmen, and he walked up to their fire without a word. When men sprang up, he laughed, and threw back his hood, and they saw that it was Beleg Strongbow. Under his wide cloak he bore a great pack in which he had brought many things for the help of men. In this way Beleg came back to Túrin, yielding to his love against his wisdom. Túrin was glad indeed, for he had often regretted his stubbornness, and now the desire of his heart was granted without the need to humble himself, or to yield his own will. But if Túrin was glad, not so was Androg, nor some others of his company. There you go. It seemed to them that there had been a tryst between Beleg and their captain, which he had kept secret from them, and Androg watched them jealously as the two sat apart in speech together. Beleg had brought with him the helm of Hador, for he hoped that it might lift Túrin's thought again above his life in the wild as the leader of a petty company. "This is your own, which I bring back to you," he said to Túrin as he took out the helm. "It was left in my keeping on the north marches, but was not forgotten, I think." "Almost," said Túrin, "but it shall not be so again," and he fell silent, looking far away with the eyes of his thought, until suddenly he caught the gleam of another thing that Beleg held in his hand. It was the gift of Melian, but the silver leaves were red in the firelight, and when Túrin saw the seal, his eyes darkened. "What have you there?" he said. "The greatest gift that one who loves you still has to give," answered Beleg. "Here is Lembas in Elid, the waybread of the Eldar that no man has yet tasted." "The helm of my father's I take, with good will for your keeping," said Túrin, "but I will not receive gifts out of Doriath." "Then send back your sword and your arms," said Beleg. "Send back also the teaching and fostering of your youth, and let your men, who you say have been faithful, die in the desert to please your mood. Nonetheless, this waybread was a gift not to you, but to me, and I may do with it as I will. Eat it not if it sticks in your throat, but others may be more hungry and less proud." Túrin's eyes glinted, but as he looked in Beleg's face, the fire in them died, and they went gray, and he said in a voice hardly to be heard, "I wonder, friend, that you design to come back to such a churl. From you I will take whatever you give, even rebuke. Henceforward you shall counsel me in all ways, save the road to Doriath only." And, that's kind of where the chapter ends there. Beleg is back again, once again. And it kind of makes me wonder if, I guess the watchmen of Túrin's company are just that bad, maybe, at keeping watch, or if Beleg is just that good at tracking them down and finding them and all the secret paths and whatnot. I'm going to guess it's kind of a bit of both, but Beleg eventually does give Túrin the Helm of Hador, I want to say it's the Helm of Hador, because sometimes I kind of forget it. Yeah, it is. Pretty much in the meantime, and kind of like what I was saying earlier as well, that Mim pretty much, he favors Túrin more because Túrin actually listens to him and actually confronts him rather than seeing him as like almost an enemy, but not quite, still very much standoffish in a way like the rest of Túrin's company is with Mim. But Túrin's the one who actually listens to him, listens to the story and the lore and whatnot, so just being a good leader. I don't know. That's what I think, so who knows. That is the end of the chapter here. There wasn't obviously a lot of action, stuff like that, but it's, it's part of the story. I liked it, just because the whole secret passages of Amonrud, things like that, makes sense for dwarves to do that, and you don't really hear a lot of dwarven adventures, quote-unquote adventures, things like that, especially with elves, but of course, there's differences when it comes to Túrin and whatnot, but I think that's kind of everything I have for the chapter. And since I didn't really cover it in the intro, just make sure that you guys check out the rest of my stuff on my channel. Obviously, I have my Grim Captivation, which is it's going good. I'm researching more and more things. Also trying to get back into my own writing, so it's going to feel a little staggered here and there, just because I'm back in school, back to writing, and then doing this whole setup, both with Exploring Arda and Grim Captivation. But it has been fun. So thank you guys for checking that out. And then, of course, likewise, check out my own fantasy book called The Lands of Ordia, Power of Heaven. It is on Amazon. First book out of 5 that I have planned. And like I said, I'm trying to write a little more throughout the year, feeling a little more inspired as I'm kind of going back into reading Tolkien stuff a little more often, other fantasy series as well. So check it out. I would greatly appreciate it. And I think, with all that being said, just stay tuned for another episode. May the light of Elbereth be with you all. Farewell.